Welcome, everyone. This podcast will be discussing the Universal Nonverbal Intelligence Test, or UNIT, as described in your assessment books beginning on page 329. The Universal Nonverbal Intelligence Test is an intellectual assessment measure for children aged 5 years through 17 years, 11 months. It includes 6 subtests and may be given as a standard battery, abbreviated battery, or extended battery. The abbreviated battery contains 2 subtests and takes 15 minutes to administer. The standard battery contains 4 subtests and takes 30 minutes to administer, and the extended battery contains all 6 subtests and takes around 45 minutes to administer. The unit measures reasoning and memory skills through the nonverbal presentation of the subtests. The 6 subtest categories are symbolic memory, spatial memory, object memory, cube design, analogic reasoning, and mazes. Symbolic memory requires examinees to observe a sequence of universal symbols for 5 seconds and reproduce them using response cards after the time is over. This subtest primarily measures short-term visual memory and complex sequential memory for meaningful material. In the spatial memory subtest, the examinee is shown a random pattern of green, black, or green and black dots on a 3x3 or 4x4 grid for 5 seconds. After the grid is removed, the examinee must attempt to recreate the spatial pattern. This subtest measures primarily a person's short-term visual memory for abstract materials. In object memory, the examinee is shown a random pictorial array of common objects for 5 seconds. A second pictorial is then presented with the same objects as the first, but with a number of additional objects. The examinee must recognize and identify the objects that were present in both pictorials by placing chips on the appropriate pictures. Cube design involves the presentation and direct reproduction of 2-color, subtract, geometric designs. While viewing the stimulus, the examinee reconstructs the design directly on the stimulus book or response mat using green and white 1-inch cubes. Cube design is primarily a measure of visual spatial reasoning. An analogic reasoning subtest, incomplete, conceptual, or geometric analogies are presented in a matrix format and require only a pointing response. The examinee completes the matrix analogies by selecting from 4 response options. Analogic reasoning is primarily a measure of symbolic reasoning. Lastly, mazes require the examinee to use paper and pencil to navigate and exit a maze by tracing a path from the center starting point of each maze to the correct exit without making incorrect decisions. These mazes become more complex as the test progresses. Mazes are primarily a measure of reasoning and planful behavior. The Universal Nonverbal Intelligence Test was designed to be a fair measure of intellectual ability for children and adolescents who may have difficulty in verbal skills that would affect their performance on a different kind of intelligence test. This could include students with hearing impairments, students from culturally or linguistically diverse environments, students who have not mastered the English language, and students with an intellectual disability or autism spectrum disorder who may have difficulty with verbal communication. Because the nonverbal assessment does not require any spoken language, several gestures for communication during the administration of the test are provided in the manual. One example of these gestures is palm rolling, which conveys a message to the student to continue, keep going, or take your turn now. The unit yields scores for the various subtests, scaled scores, and a full-scale IQ score. The scaled scores are for the 4 scales of memory, reasoning, and symbolic and non-symbolic concepts. The memory scale relates to the story of information as well as the skills and abilities needed for memory, including attending, encoding, and organization. The reasoning subtest focuses on the ability to problem solve. The symbolic scale assesses abilities that are believed to be precursors to understanding and using language. The non-symbolic scale assesses processing, perception, and integration of information. The proper administration of the unit and interpretation of its scores requires adequate training and experience. Only those individuals who have had the proper training and experience to handle this responsibility in a professional and technically adequate manner should administer and interpret the unit. Those who administer the Universal Nonverbal Intelligence Test will most likely be school psychologists and certified specialists.